The scent of jasmine clung to the hall, sweet but suffocating, mixing with the sharp taste of panic sitting heavy on my tongue. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, stiff in a gown that sparkled more than I ever could. The tight twists of my pale blonde hair pulled at my scalp, reminding me with every heartbeat that I didn't belong in this world of perfect smiles and polished lies. Bright chandeliers washed the marble floors in gold, yet everything felt cold. A string quartet played in the distance, something soft, elegant, and completely wrong. To me, it sounded like a slow march toward the life I didn't want. My fingers curled around the silver locket at my throat, my mother's last gift before fever stole her from me. "Kindness is your rebellion," she had whispered, her voice fading like smoke. "When the world tries to shrink you, stay soft. I wish you were here now, because in this ballroom I wasn't soft, I was trapped. A prize to be claimed. Darling, you look positively ill." My stepmother's sugary tones sliced through my thoughts. Vivian glided to my side in her crimson dress, confidence dripping off her like perfume. "Surely you're not doubting Damien Ashford. He's paying quite generously. Your father is thrilled." Generous, as if that word made any of this less degrading. Damien Ashford, his name alone made my stomach twist. I'd met him twice. Both times he'd looked at me the way a butcher studies a cut of meat, eyes cold and assessing. He was twice my age. His hands lingered too long. His smile never reached his eyes. All because of my father's debts, I had become a bargaining chip. "I'm fine," I said, lying so smoothly it scared me. Vivian's painted lips curved upward. "Good, he'll make the announcement soon. Do try to look happy. People are watching." People were always watching, or judging, or whispering. Our family name had once meant something, but my father's bad choices had stripped us of everything, and now I was the price to rebuild his pride. The walls were closing in. My breath grew thin. I needed to escape before I shattered in front of everyone. I slipped through the crowd, pretending I was invisible, something I'd mastered over the years. No one stopped me as I pushed through a side door into the garden. The night air hit my skin like freedom. I pulled in a shaky breath, letting the cool breeze calm the fire inside my chest. Lanterns hung between the old oak trees, casting warm light and deep shadows across the garden. I walked deeper, letting the music fade behind me until I reached a quiet alcove near a small fountain. Only the sound of water remained, steady, soothing, almost enough to make me believe life could still be mine. I sank onto a marble bench, elbows on my knees, head in my hands. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. Tears wouldn't change my future. Tears wouldn't save me. Then I heard footsteps, not soft, not hesitant, heavy, slow, certain. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who feared nothing. I lifted my head quickly, wiping my eyes, and froze. A man stood at the entrance of the alcove. The lantern glow framed him in gold light, but his face stayed in shadow. Still, his presence hit me like a force, strong, commanding, and carrying something dangerous under the surface. His dark clothes seemed to swallow the light around him. There was something about him that didn't feel human. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, his voice low and rough, like warm smoke rolling across my skin. "I thought this corner of the garden was empty. A proper young lady would have stood, apologized, and left, but for the first time that night, I didn't want to pretend." And before I could stop myself, the truth slipped out of me like a sigh. "I'm hiding." The words slipped out before I could catch them. A soft, low sound came from the stranger, almost like a quiet laugh, warm but dangerous. He stepped closer, and the lantern light finally revealed his face. My breath caught. He looked like a storm wearing human skin, fierce beauty mixed with raw, untamed danger. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that glowed like silver fire. His dark hair fell messily across his forehead, giving him a wild, effortless look that didn't belong in a place full of polished nobles. Everything in me yelled two things at once: run and don't move. "There's always something worth hiding from," he said, lowering himself onto the other end of the bench without a hint of hesitation. Anyone else sitting beside me without permission would have annoyed me, but with him somehow it felt natural, almost grounding. "I'm being sold," I blurted out. The truth tumbled from me before I could stop it. My father is forcing me into a marriage to pay off his debts. The man is cruel and old, and he looks at me like I'm property. They're announcing it tonight. After that, I'm trapped. Why was I telling him this, a complete stranger? Maybe it was the dark. Maybe it was the distance from the ballroom. Maybe I was just breaking. Then don't let it happen. His voice was calm, steady, like he was giving the simplest advice in the world. A bitter laugh escaped me. "You don't understand. I have no money, no support. No one who cares what I want. When Damien Ashford calls me forward, I'll smile, nod, and let myself be dragged into a life I don't want, because that's what a good daughter does." His silver eyes fixed on me, sharp and unyielding. "Is that really what you think, that you're powerless?" "I know I am, then you're wrong." He leaned in just slightly, and his scent washed over me, pine, night air, and something wild I couldn't name. "Power isn't always coin or status," he murmured. Sometimes it's the refusal to bend, sometimes it's choosing yourself. Easy for you to say, I snapped, surprising myself. You're not the one being handed over like cattle. Instead of getting offended, he smiled. A slow, dangerous smile that sent a shiver straight through my stomach. You'd be surprised, he murmured. I know exactly what it feels like to be used. Before I could answer, voices echoed down the garden path. My stepmother's shrill voice cut through the night. She must be out here. Damien has arrived early and she needs to be presented properly. Panic stabbed through my chest. They were close, too close. I jumped to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs. The stranger rose too, watching me with those unsettling silver eyes that seemed to see every crack in my soul. Please, I whispered, not even sure what I was begging for. Help. A shield, a tiny miracle. Footsteps grew louder. Viven's voice sharpened, calling my name. And then something inside me snapped. A desperate, reckless spark lit by fear and my mother's old words about choosing my own rebellion. I closed the distance between us in 3 quick steps and threw my arms around him, pressing my face into his chest. His entire body went rigid with surprise, muscles tightening under my hands. But he was warm, solid, safe in a way I hadn't felt in months. I'm so sorry, I breathed against his shirt. But I need you to be someone, anyone, just for a moment. His hands hovered at my sides, unsure, then slowly settled at my waist. The touch sent a rush of heat through me, electric and impossible to ignore. What's your name? He murmured, his breath brushing my hair. Ilar, I whispered, the name my mother gave me, the one my father had buried after she died. Saying it felt like taking myself back. Ilar, he repeated softly, tasting the name like it meant something. There you are. Viven's voice shattered everything like a stone through glass. I pulled away just enough to face her, keeping one hand gripping the stranger's shirt like a lifeline. She stood at the entrance, shock flickering across her features before settling into thinly veiled fury. Behind her stepped 3 silhouettes. My father, stiff and uneasy in clothes that didn't fit him. Damien Ashford, his cold gray eyes narrowing as he examined the scene like I was livestock trying to escape the pen. And beside them, a woman dressed in elegant black, watching us with sharp, unreadable eyes. The moment felt like the edge of a blade. And I had no idea which way it would cut next. What is the meaning of this? My father's voice cracked across the garden. He tried to sound strong, but the fear underneath was impossible to miss. He was always like that, quivering around anyone with real power, terrified of making a mistake. The stranger's arm tightened slightly around my waist. The hold wasn't rough, but it was firm enough to feel like a silent claim. Protective, unshakable. Possessive in a way that sent a strange shiver through me. When he spoke, his voice cut through the night like a command. The meaning, he said calmly, should be obvious. Damien Ashford stepped forward, face red with fury. This girl is promised to me, he snapped. The papers are signed. The agreement is settled. I don't know who you think you are, but you're interfering in business that has nothing to do with... A sharp gasp broke the air. The woman in black stared at the man holding me, her eyes widening. She dropped into a deep curtsy so fast her dress brushed the ground. Your Majesty, she breathed, everything went still. My father's skin turned ghost white. Vivian swayed as if she might collapse. Even Damien froze, anger draining from his face as confusion and then fear slowly replaced it. I looked up at the man beside me, my mind spinning. Your Majesty. The stranger I had grabbed in pure desperation. The man I had poured my heart out to, the man now holding me like he had every right to, he wasn't a stranger at all. His silver eyes flicked to mine. Something moved in them, quiet amusement, resignation, and a warning I didn't fully understand. Yes, he said softly, though the sound carried through every corner of the garden. I suppose introductions are in order. Block 2 rewritten, the world tilted, and for a terrifying second I thought my knees might give out. If his hand hadn't stayed firm at my waist, grounding me, I might have collapsed right there in front of everyone. I am Cashin Wolf, he continued, his voice steady and absolute. Alpha King of the Northern Territories, ruler of the Lunar Court. His title hit the air like thunder. Whispers of the Alpha King had always sounded like bedtime myths, stories of a ruler who commanded armies and beasts, of wolves who walked like men and men who hunted like gods. They weren't supposed to be real, but he was standing right here, warm at my side, more solid and powerful than anything I'd ever imagined. My father finally found enough air to speak. Why, Your Majesty, we didn't know you would attend tonight. If we'd known proper preparations, protocols... I don't want protocols, Cashin said smoothly. I wanted privacy. Instead, I found something far more intriguing. His fingers shifted slightly against my waist, barely a movement, but enough to send heat rushing up my neck. I knew I should pull away, put distance between us, act like a respectable lady, but my body wouldn't move. Something deep in me whispered that stepping away would be a terrible mistake. Damien finally forced out words, though rage shook every syllable. This is impossible. A contract exists between her family and mine. Everything is legally binding. You cannot. Cashin dropped the word like a blade, the air tightened, the lantern seemed to flicker, the hair on my arms rose as if the night itself held its breath. The woman in black tried to warn him. Lord Ashford, I strongly advise— I don't need your advice, Margaret, Damien snapped, his eyes locked on Cashin. The girl's father owes me. This marriage is the settlement. No one, not even a king, can interfere. Cashin's smile sharpened into something cold and merciless. Is that so? Then tell me, Lord Ashford, are these debts registered with the crown? Did you pay the required taxes on your little arrangement? Damien's face drained of blood. My father let out a strangled sound, like someone choking on hope and fear at the same time. I thought not, Cashin continued, his tone almost conversational. Which means your precious contract lives in a rather dangerous legal shadow. One could even call it illegal money lending. And the punishment for that in this province is quite severe. My king, my father stammered, falling to one knee on the stone path. Please, I meant no disrespect. I didn't know any of the formal procedures. Ignorance, Cashin replied calmly, rarely spares anyone from consequences. His power pressed through the garden like invisible heat, making my heartbeat trip in my chest. But, he added, voice softening a fraction, tonight I find myself unusually generous. He glanced down at me, everyone followed his gaze. The whole garden, my father, my stepmother, the nobles, the guards, Damien, held their breath as if waiting for his next words, and I felt their eyes on me. The girl standing in the Alpha King's arms, the girl who had ruined every plan, the girl who suddenly mattered. I wanted to vanish, sink through the stone path and disappear from every watching eye, but Cashin's hand kept me steady, his thumb moving in a slow circle against my waist. A tiny gesture, quiet, hidden, yet it sent heat racing up my spine. What exactly are you implying? Vivian's tone was calm on the surface, but I could hear the greedy calculation underneath. She was already trying to twist the moment into something she could use. I'm implying, Cashin replied, voice cool and unshaken, that these debts might be settled in another way. Through the Crown's treasury, for example, I'm always open to acquiring promising assets. The word assets made my stomach knot. Was I just being passed from one owner to another? Cashin's hand tightened only a little, but enough to feel like reassurance. Of course, he went on, such arrangements need proper discussion, and we cannot have that out here in a garden with half the province listening behind the hedges. He wasn't wrong. I could sense bodies shifting in the shadows, servants, guests, anyone starved for gossip. Margaret, the woman in black, finally rose from her deep curtsy. Your Majesty, she said carefully, your security team is waiting near the east gate. A more private location might be wiser. As always, Margaret, your advice is sound. Cashin nodded lightly before turning his attention back to my father, who was still kneeling. Lord Thorne, he said, you and your family will come to the palace tomorrow at noon. We'll discuss terms then. The palace? My father's voice cracked like thin ice. Unless, Cashin added smoothly, you'd prefer to continue negotiations with Lord Ashford and his questionable paperwork. The threat hung cold and sharp in the air. No, your Majesty, my father stammered, scrambling to stand. We'll be there, noon, absolutely. Damien looked like he was about to explode again, but Margaret placed a warning hand on his arm and whispered something sharp enough to silence him. Excellent, Cashin said, as if everything were simple and settled. Then he looked down at me. Walk with me. It wasn't a command, but it wasn't a request either. His voice was soft, almost careful, like he was giving me a choice, not an order. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. We moved through the garden path together. Cashin shifted his hand from my waist to the small of my back. His touch guided but didn't push, steady but never forceful. People parted for us in stunned silence. I saw wide eyes, heard whispers spreading behind us like wildfire, but it all felt far away, muffled by the shock humming through my body. Margaret and two broad-shouldered guards followed behind, keeping a respectful distance. You're trembling, Cashin said quietly once we were out of earshot. I just hugged the Alpha King, I whispered back, the truth hitting me hard. I grabbed you like you were just some random person. A low laugh slipped from him, warm, unexpectedly gentle. You weren't wrong, kings can be strangers too. We reached a small clearing filled with night-blooming roses, their heavy scent wrapped around us, sweet and thick. Moonlight filtered through the branches, turning Cashin's features sharper, more dangerous, more unreal. You were brave back there, he said. I was desperate. I folded my arms across my chest now that he wasn't touching me. The night suddenly felt colder. Bravery and desperation looked the same to most people. His silver gaze tracked every flicker of emotion on my face. You could have gone along with everything, smiled, obeyed. Let yourself be handed away, most would. My mother used to say compassion is rebellion, I murmured, fingers brushing the locket at my throat, but I don't think she meant grabbing random men in gardens. That earned me a real smile, quick but so genuine it softened the sharpness of his entire face. No, he said quietly, probably not. He studied me for a moment before asking, "That is your true name, isn't it?" "It was my mother's choice." I swallowed. My father stopped using it after she died. I wasn't sure why I kept telling him the truth, maybe because he was the first person in months who'd asked instead of demanded. "Then you'll be a lar to me," he said like it was final. He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "Tomorrow at the palace, things will move quickly. Your father will fight for whatever benefits him. Damien will try to salvage his pride. Everyone will have plans for you except you. Isn't that always how it goes?" I said bitterly, surprising myself. "It doesn't have to be." Cashin stepped closer, his scent brushing over me again. "Pine, night, and something wild beneath the surface." "I meant what I said about the crown covering the debts," he continued, "but I will not put you in another cage. Even a beautiful one." "Why?" The question escaped in a rush. "Why help me? You don't know anything about me except that I panic hug strange men." His lips curved into a softer, amused smile, and just like that, the air between us tightened, charged, uncertain, and impossibly alive. His expression shifted, turning distant, as if an old memory had pulled him away from the present. "Someone once told me," he murmured quietly, "that true strength is shown in what you do for people who can give you nothing back." A shadow crossed his face, the kind born from wounds that never fully heal. I wanted to ask what he meant, what ghosts he was remembering, but before I could speak, Margaret stepped out from the trees, her urgency unmistakable. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing quickly, "forgive the interruption. The council has sent word. There's been an incident at the northern border. They request your immediate return." A dark flicker ran through Cashin's eyes, frustration, anger, and a tired acceptance that this was simply the burden of a king. "Of course there has," he muttered under his breath. When he turned back to me, something hardened in him. The king resurfaced, closing over the man I'd just glimpsed. "Remember what I told you," he said. "Tomorrow at noon. Come prepared to fight for what you want." "I don't know how to fight," I admitted, my voice barely above a breath. "Then it's time you learned." His fingers brushed mine, soft, quick, almost unreal, but the warmth stayed even after he pulled away. "Until tomorrow," he said before moving toward the path. Margaret and the guards fell into step around him, and within moments I was alone among the roses, their scent heavy in the air, the warmth of his touch still clinging to my skin. I stood there, trying to breathe, trying to think. An hour ago, my fate had been sealed. I was supposed to be handed over to a cruel man to settle my father's debts. Now the Alpha King himself had given me an invitation that felt like salvation wrapped in danger. When I finally stepped back into the ballroom, chaos had replaced celebration. Guests whispered in tight circles. My father and Viven looked pale and shaken. Damon Ashford had vanished. The moment my father saw me, fury lit his face. He grabbed my arm so hard I gasped. "What have you done?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me?" "Let her go." The voice came from behind him, sharp, steady. A young woman with copper-red hair and bright green eyes stood there, small in stature but carrying herself like she owned the room. I recognized her vaguely, someone from the lesser nobility, but her name escaped me. "This is family business," my father snapped. "And that bruise you're making on her arm is assault," she said coolly. "In front of at least 40 witnesses, including myself, Duchess Revena of the Eastern Province. I wonder how the Alpha King would react to such behavior, especially towards someone he seems interested in." My father released me instantly as though my skin had burned him. The Duchess smiled, sharp, satisfied, not remotely friendly. "Wise decision." She turned to me. "Come, dear, let's get you somewhere calmer." She offered her arm. I hesitated, then took it. As we walked away, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. That was either unbelievably brave or incredibly stupid, possibly both, but gods, it made the night much more entertaining. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. "Oh, no one ever means to catch the Alpha King's eye," she laughed, bright, musical, out of place in the tension-filled hall. "But you did, and everything changes now. The real question is, are you ready?" I thought of my mother's locket, Cashin's silver eyes, the decision that had changed everything in a single heartbeat. "I don't know," I admitted. "Good." Revena's smile softened into something real. "Doubt means your head is still working. Tomorrow walk into the palace with your chin high and your mind sharp. You'll need both." Morning slammed into me far too fast. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, Cashin's silver gaze reappeared, the feel of his hand at my waist, the ice-cold command he used to tear apart Damon Ashford's claims. Part of me wondered if I'd imagined it all, if desperation had finally twisted my mind into dreaming of impossible rescues. But the bruise on my arm was real, and so was the sharp knock on my door at dawn. "Get up." Viven's voice sliced through the wood. "We have 3 hours to make you presentable for the palace, and you look like you crawled through a hedge." I wanted to bury myself under the blankets and pretend none of this was happening. Instead, I opened the door. Viven swept inside with 3 servants trailing behind her, their arms loaded with fabrics, cosmetics, and hair tools that looked more like torture devices. I can dress myself, I said weakly. You absolutely cannot. She waved me toward the center of the room. Do you have any idea what's at stake? The Alpha King himself summoned us. This visit could save our family or ruin it, and everything depends on how well you perform. Perform like a trained creature on display. The next 2 hours blurred together, hands tugging at me from every direction, corset strings pulled tight enough to steal my breath, a gown so expensive I was afraid to move, and my pale hair pinned and twisted until Vivan finally nodded with stiff satisfaction. They worked over me for what felt like ages, brushing soft color along my cheeks and darkening my eyes until they seemed larger, brighter, almost unreal. By the time they stepped back, the girl in the mirror barely looked like me. She was polished and expensive-looking, yet strangely hollow, like a doll someone had dressed for display. Remember this? Vivian said sharply as she clasped a thin gold chain around my neck. Not my mother's locket, the one that had vanished from my jewelry box overnight. You will smile, you will be quiet. And you will agree to whatever the king decides. Last night you caused enough trouble, let today be the day you fix it. The words hit a nerve and a small, reckless spark escaped my mouth. What if I don't want to be arranged again? Vivian's face turned to stone. What you want doesn't matter, she said coldly. Your father's debts still exist. Your little flirtation with royalty didn't magically erase them. We need this alliance whether you like it or not. Before I could answer her, my father appeared at the doorway. He looked worn down and nervous in his formal coat, as though the fabric itself were suffocating him. The carriage is ready, he announced. We have to leave now if we want to arrive on schedule. The ride to the palace lasted 40 minutes, climbing steadily into the hills. I sat across from them, silent, watching the world change outside the window. Neat gardens and farmlands faded behind us, replaced by deeper forests where sunlight filtered through tangled branches like gold breaking through smoke. This was the Alpha King's domain. I could feel it, something wild humming beneath the earth, brushing against my skin like a warning or a welcome. My heartbeat answered it, quickening without my permission. Then, through the trees, the palace revealed itself. It wasn't white marble or bright stone like the stories claimed. It was darker, built from deep charcoal rock that seemed to drink in the light. Tall towers stretched upward like claws reaching for the clouds. Ivy wound over the walls in twisting patterns, merging the structure with the forest around it, as if the palace had grown from the ground instead of being built. Guards stood at the entrance, still as statues yet radiating strength. When our carriage halted, one stepped forward and opened the door swiftly. Lord Thorne and family, my father declared too loudly, as though raising his voice might hide his fear. We have an appointment with His Majesty. You're expected, the guard replied. His eyes drifted over all of us, but paused when they reached me. Something flickered there, a brief flash of recognition or interest, gone too quickly to read. Margaret will escort you. She appeared at once, dressed in black again, her expression neat and unreadable. Welcome to Silvercrest Palace. Please follow me. We were led through long hallways designed to make any visitor feel small. The ceilings arched high above us, carved from dark beams. Portraits of former rulers lined the walls, their stern eyes tracking our steps. Servants slipped through the corridors soundlessly, moving with practiced grace. Twice I caught sight of people whose presence felt different. Their movements were too smooth, too controlled. Their eyes carried that faint inner glow I'd seen in Cassian's. Werewolves, real ones, walking past us as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Margaret guided us into a sitting room filled with deep green fabrics and warm gold accents. Tall windows stretched up the walls, opening to a courtyard garden alive with soft morning light. Please wait here, she said. His Majesty will join you shortly. May I bring refreshments? That won't be necessary, my father said stiffly, terrified of appearing needy. Actually, I heard myself say before I could think better of it, a cup of tea would be lovely. Margaret's lips twitched, approval or amusement, I couldn't tell. Of course, my lady. The door closed behind her. Vivian rounded on me instantly. Do not speak unless spoken to directly, do not ask for anything, and for the love of the goddess, do not pull another stunt like last night. You mean grabbing the king because I was desperate? I said lightly, though something fierce and restless had settled inside me since dawn. Hard to avoid mistakes when he isn't a stranger anymore. This isn't a game, my father snapped. Damon Ashford is livid. He's threatening to call in every debt we owe if this arrangement fails. Do you understand what that means? My father hissed. We'll lose everything, the house, the land, even the clothes we're wearing. Then maybe, I said quietly, you shouldn't have gambled our life away. His hand lifted before I even realized he meant to strike me. Instinct took over. I jerked back, my shoulder hitting the wall, but the blow never landed. I wouldn't do that. Cassian's voice rolled through the room like distant thunder, low, dark, and full of warning. He stood in the doorway, which had somehow opened without a sound. His silver eyes were locked on my father, cold enough to freeze bone. Not in my house, he said, not ever again. My father's face drained of color, flushing red, then turning pale, then settling into a sickly gray. He dropped his raised hand immediately and bent so deeply it looked painful. Your Majesty, I apologize. A moment of frustration, nothing more. Surely you understand the pressure? I understand perfectly. Cashin stepped into the room with the same controlled, predatory grace I'd seen in the garden. In daylight, he was even more overwhelming, broad-shouldered, impossibly confident, power wrapped around him like a second skin. Even Vivian shifted backward without realizing it, which, he continued, is exactly why we're going to discuss expectations and boundaries. He looked different from the night before, sharper, cleaner, every detail intentional. A fitted dark jacket threaded with faint silver lines. Practical trousers and heavy boots meant for someone who didn't just sit on a throne but commanded a kingdom. His hair was pulled back, revealing the hard angles of his jaw and the full glow of his impossible eyes. Two others entered behind him, a man with warm brown skin, a friendly smile that didn't quite hide the calculation in his gaze, and a woman with cropped auburn hair, strong shoulders, and the alert posture of someone who lived in battle. Their presence carried the same coiled strength as Cashin. My advisors, Cashin said, gesturing to each. Dominic, he oversees treasury and foreign matters, and Sarah, she commands the palace guard. Sarah grinned, revealing canines just sharp enough to remind me what she really was. Margaret slipped in behind them, carrying a full tea service. She placed it neatly on the table before moving to stand near the door. Suddenly the room felt too full, too warm, like every breath needed approval. Sit, Cashin said, motioning to the chairs. It wasn't a suggestion. We all obeyed. I chose the seat farthest from my father, putting distance between us now that the fragile balance of power had completely shifted. In our home, he ruled through fear. Here, he might as well have been a servant waiting for punishment. Cashin remained standing, calm but razor alert. Let's speak plainly, he began. Lord Thorne, your debts to Damien Ashford total roughly 15,000 gold marks, gambling losses and unpaid loans, correct? My father swallowed so loudly I heard it. Yes, your Majesty. And to repay them, Cashin continued, you attempted to marry your daughter to him despite her obvious discomfort with the union. It was a reasonable solution too. I wasn't finished. The words were quiet, but they shut my father up instantly. These arrangements were made without proper crown approval, Cashin said, voice steady and cutting, which makes them legally questionable. Additionally, Damien Ashford manages lending operations that haven't paid required taxes or licensing fees. He profits by preying on desperate families, yours included. Dominic stepped forward with a leather folder. We've already started reviewing his accounts, he said. So far we've found tax violations, illegal interest rates, and multiple counts of fraud. Lord Ashford is in no position to demand payment from anyone right now. Relief washed over my father's features so fast it was almost embarrassing. So the debts are void? He asked hopefully. No, Cashin's tone dropped to ice. Your debts remain. Ashford's corruption doesn't erase what you owe, but the method of repayment will change. The Crown will take responsibility for the sum in exchange for certain considerations. Here it was. The cost, the new cage with silk curtains instead of steel bars, and what considerations would those be? Vivan asked, voice tight with practiced politeness. Cashin looked at me, something softened in his expression, not weakness, but something dangerously close to concern. That, he said, depends on what she wants. The room froze, air stilled, even the servants seemed to stop breathing. I managed. Cashin didn't look away. What do you want? He repeated, each word slow and deliberate. Not your father, not your stepmother, you. Because if I'm going to clear these debts, I won't do it by trapping you in another unwanted arrangement. It was a question nobody had ever asked me, not once. Not in all the months spent preparing to be traded to Damien Ashford like an object instead of a person. No one had ever asked me what I wanted. Not in all the years since my mother died, years spent shrinking, disappearing, being pressed into whatever shape my father or Vivan required. So when Cashin asked the question, the answer rose inside me with surprising clarity. I want to be free, I said softly, not a payment for someone's debt. Not a bargaining chip, not a disappointment, just free to choose my own life. Cashin tilted his head slightly. Even if that path is difficult, he asked. Even if it means leaving behind everything you've ever known? Everything I know, I replied, has felt like a cage. My fingertips brushed the warm locket hidden beneath the borrowed gold necklace, the one that had mysteriously reappeared under my pillow that morning, as if placed there by unseen hands. I'd rather face hardship with dignity than stay somewhere safe without a choice. Sarah made a sound of approval. Dominic's expression stayed blank, but something in his eyes shifted, calculating, reassessing. Cashin smiled, then slow, quiet, but powerful. It changed his entire face, softening the warrior lines into something dangerously human. Then I have a proposal for you, he said, but it's a discussion we should have in private. Your father and stepmother can wait outside. Your Majesty, my father sputtered, scandalized. Surely that's improper. Margaret will stay as chaperone, Cashin said smoothly. And I'm not asking for your approval, I'm informing you. Vivian looked like she wanted to argue, but Dominic was already opening the door with a polite, unyielding smile. There's a very comfortable waiting area just down the hall, he said. You'll be taken care of. They had no choice except to go. My father shot me a look dripping with warning, but I ignored him, keeping my focus on Cashin as the door shut behind them. Silence settled over the room, heavy, warm, full of possibility. You meant what you said? Cashin murmured, studying me with those unsettling silver eyes. About wanting freedom. You weren't performing. Every word was true, I said. Good, his voice deepened. Because what I'm about to offer will require courage, flexibility, and patience. He paused, choosing his next words with care. The werewolf territories have been isolated for too long. My people are strong, but our ties to the human world are thin. We need someone who can bridge that gap, someone who can move between both worlds. You want a diplomat? I asked, confused. I want someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated, he said. Someone who survived harsh circumstances without becoming cruel, someone who saw every reason to stop caring and chose compassion anyway. Heat rose in my chest. He remembered the garden, everything I'd said in the dark, everything I thought he'd forgotten. What exactly are you asking of me? I whispered. Sarah stepped in. To put it plainly, she said, he needs a human liaison, a representative who can work between our court and yours, someone who can help build understanding between the species. We've never appointed one before, nobody ever earned our trust. Dominic grinned. Until you grabbed the king in a panic, quite the introduction. My cheeks burned, but my voice stayed steady. And in exchange, you'd erase my father's debts? Cashin shook his head. I'd erase them regardless. That's already done. What I'm giving you now is a choice. A choice, an actual choice. You can return to your old life, he said, free of Damien Ashford but still bound to your father's home, or, he held my gaze, you can accept a position here with your own quarters, a salary, independence. It was almost too generous. Too unreal, which meant he wasn't telling me something. What's the catch? I asked quietly. His smile turned honest, dangerously so. You'd be living in a palace full of werewolves, he said. Not all of them see humans kindly, some want nothing to do with your kind. Others consider humans weak, you'd face prejudice, suspicion, maybe even open hostility. So basically my current life, I said dryly, but with better housing and people who actually admit they dislike me. Sarah burst out laughing. I like her, she said. Cashin's expression shifted, serious again. There's one more thing you need to understand. Last night when you touched me, my reaction wasn't political. The protectiveness you felt wasn't strategy. My heartbeat stumbled. Complicate what? I asked, but part of me already knew. Cashin's gaze locked onto mine, steady and unguarded. Among werewolves, he said quietly, there are bonds we can't control. Instinctive recognition, a pull towards someone we're meant for. My breath caught, because deep inside my chest, something had already started to answer him. Rare, powerful, and extremely inconvenient when it sparks with someone you barely know, someone who grabbed you in panic and used you as a shield. Cashin dragged a hand through his hair, ruining its perfect, formal style. He looked almost frustrated with himself. I'm not saying that's what happened, he went on, but I am saying I felt something last night that I've never felt before, and you needed to hear that before making your choice. The room went still, even the air paused as if waiting for my next breath. Margaret, still stationed at the door, let out a quiet noise, something between sympathy and amusement. I thought about his offer. Freedom, purpose, risk, a chance to matter. I thought about my mother's words, how kindness was its own rebellion. I thought about how, for the first time in years, someone had made me feel brave enough to reach for a future instead of shrinking from it. I accept, I said. The position, the challenges, all of it. Cashin's expression shifted, surprise flickering first, then relief, and finally something warmer. Something that made my heart stumble. Just like that, he asked softly, just like that. I held his gaze. You asked what I wanted. I want a life that matters, a life I choose. If that means walking into a palace full of werewolves who might despise me, then so be it. It's still better than being traded to Damien Ashford. That, Sarah said dryly, is the lowest bar on record. Dominic added with a grin, but she cleared it beautifully. Welcome to Silvercrest, Ara, he said. Things just got a lot more interesting for you. Outside the tall windows, the forest stretched endlessly, untamed, shadowed, alive with mysteries I would soon be forced to face. The old version of me would have been terrified. But the version reborn last night, desperate, reckless, brave, was ready. 3 weeks later, Silvercrest Palace, the first 3 weeks were a crash course in survival. Cashin hadn't lied. The moment the court learned a human had been given an official position, one that placed me near the Alpha King, the hostility began. At first it was small, almost petty. Servants forgetting to bring meals. Courtiers falling silent the instant I stepped into a room. Guards watching me with everything from suspicion to thinly veiled contempt. Margaret became my unlikely shield, appearing at exactly the right moments to intercept trouble before it reached me. "They're testing you," she told me one morning as she steered me through the palace halls toward my first council meeting. "Werewolves respect strength. If you bend, they'll tear you apart, metaphorically." "Mostly, that's comforting," I muttered, adjusting the dark green dress I'd chosen, simple, elegant, meant to imply seriousness without pretension. "You survived your father," Margaret said briskly, "and nearly being sold to Damien Ashford, you can handle a few territorial wolves." The council chamber. The chamber was circular and tall-windowed, filled with morning light that cut across the carved wooden table like golden blades. The table itself was a masterpiece, patterns of wolves weaving through the grain as if running through a forest. 7 council members sat waiting. Cashin occupied the central chair, dressed in black and silver, every inch the ruler. Sarah and Dominic flanked him, both giving me small, encouraging nods. The others were unfamiliar: a silver-haired woman with piercing ice-blue eyes, 2 heavy-set men who looked like they could snap stone with their hands, and a young man with copper hair and a smile that felt like a trap. "Welcome, Ara," Cashin said, gesturing to an empty chair between Sarah and the silver-haired woman. "Please sit." I walked forward with as much controlled confidence as I could fake. Every gaze followed me, weighing me, cataloging me. The silver-haired woman's stare was razor-sharp, dissecting every detail like she was identifying weaknesses. Cashin continued, "For those who haven't been properly introduced, this is Ara, our new human liaison." He gestured around the table. "You already know Sarah and Dominic. This is Counselor Isadora." The silver-haired woman inclined her head a mere fraction. "Counselors Henrik and Macias." The 2 broad men nodded, stone-faced. "And Counselor Rowan." The copper-haired man gave me that unsettling smile again. "Charmed," Rowan said smoothly. "Though I admit I'm curious what qualifications a human brings to such an unprecedented role." The challenge in his tone was unmistakable, sharp enough to cut. "Rowan." Sarah's voice dropped into a warning growl. I spoke before Cashin could cut in. "It's a fair question," I said. Even though my heartbeat was slamming against my ribs, I forced my voice to stay steady. "I don't have political training, I'm not a diplomat, but I've lived inside systems built to control me, silence me, and make me believe I was worth nothing. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to have my decisions made for me, to be treated like property instead of a person. If your goal is to build trust between humans and werewolves, maybe someone who's lived that struggle is exactly what you need." The entire table fell quiet. Isadora's ice-blue eyes narrowed as she studied me. "Well said," she finally replied, her tone crisp and commanding, the kind that didn't need to raise its volume to dominate a room. "But words are simple. Your actions will determine whether you truly belong here." "I wouldn't expect anything less," I answered, matching her gaze. A faint flicker, almost approval, crossed her face before she turned to Cashin. "Shall we continue?" The meeting dragged on for 2 exhausting hours. Trade deals with human provinces, tense border disputes between werewolf packs, layers upon layers of politics I barely understood. I stayed mostly quiet, listening, absorbing the power dynamics shifting around the table, and I noticed things. How Henrik and Macias deferred to Isadora like she was the true spine of the council. How Rowan watched Cashin with a strange mix of respect and resentment simmering under his calm expression. How Sarah and Dominic held whole conversations with nothing but glances and tiny gestures. And I noticed Cashin noticing me, quick, subtle looks, as if checking that I hadn't fled, hadn't cracked, hadn't changed my mind about being here. By the time the meeting ended, my legs shook when I stood. My mind felt wrung out. "You handled yourself well," Dominic murmured as the others drifted away. "Especially considering Rowan's been arguing against your position since the announcement," Sarah added. "He'll keep trying. His whole family wants to cut all contact with humans. You being here ruins that plan." "Lucky me," I said dryly. Cashin approached then, and the others immediately stepped back, giving us space. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Court politics are a harsh introduction." "I've lived through worse," I replied, though my fingers trembled around my notes. "At least here people don't pretend to like me while working to destroy me." My stepmother smiled while she pushed the knife in. "Direct hostility is almost refreshing." "That's a depressing standard for improvement," he muttered, brow furrowing. "Margaret told me," he went on, "about the issues. Servants avoiding you, supplies disappearing from your rooms." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "You shouldn't have to deal with that alone." That softness, that quiet concern, nearly broke something in me. I'd been holding myself together out of pure stubbornness, refusing to look weak. Determined to prove I deserved to stand in this place. But his eyes, gods, the way he looked at me, like my struggles mattered, like I mattered. "I don't know how to be any other way," I whispered. "Then learn," he said simply. He reached out slow, careful, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. His fingers brushed mine where they clutched my notes and warmth shot up my arm. "You chose this place," he said. which means you're part of this court, and that means you have allies. Use them. Is that a royal command? I tried to joke, even as my heart twisted painfully in my chest. No, he said softly. It's a request from someone who knows what carrying too much feels like. His thumb traced a slow circle across the back of my hand, the same gentle motion he'd given me that first night in the garden. I need you to succeed here, Ara, not just for politics, for yourself. And that means you need to stay alive long enough to change anything. I opened my mouth to respond, but the corridor outside erupted. Shouting, running footsteps, something crashing hard into a wall. Cashin's entire presence shifted instantly, the warmth vanished, replaced by sharp, lethal focus. A predator awakened. Stay here, he ordered, already moving. Naturally, I ignored him. The hallway was chaos. 3 guards held down a young man, practically a boy, who thrashed against their grip, wild with fear. His clothes were torn, dirt-streaked, blood smeared across his arms from fresh wounds. Let me speak to the king, he shouted. Please, they took her, my sister. Cashin lifted a hand and the guards stopped instantly. We should restrain him, your majesty, one warned. He forced his way past the gate. He attacked 2 sentries. I said release him, Cashin commanded, voice ringing with absolute authority. The guards obeyed, though they hovered close. The boy stumbled forward and dropped to his knees. Please, he gasped. My sister Alina. We were traveling through the Western Territory when men attacked us. Human men, but they knew about werewolves. They had silver, he broke off, shaking, desperate, and the air around us grew cold. They killed my father and they took Alina. The boy's voice cracked as the words tumbled out, breaking into raw, painful sobs. I followed them for 3 days, but the trail vanished near the human villages. I can't find her, please, I need help. He collapsed forward, shaking with exhaustion and grief. Before I even realized what I was doing, I knelt beside him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're safe now, I whispered. You reached the king, he won't ignore this. He lifted his head, eyes blazing gold like melted sunlight. When he noticed me, his breath hitched. You're human, I am, I said calmly, but you're with the king, you're with the wolves. Suspicion and confusion warred across his face. I'm with anyone who needs help, I told him firmly. Start from the beginning. Every detail matters if we're going to find your sister. Cashin lowered himself to the boy's other side, his usual authority softening into something steady and reassuring. What's your name? He asked. Finn, the boy whispered. Finn Aldridge. My family serves the Western Pack. We were visiting my mother's relatives when his voice broke apart again. How old is Alina? I asked gently. 14, he choked out. She's only 14, she must be terrified. We'll find her, Cashin said, and the certainty in his voice was so absolute it almost felt like a promise carved in stone. Sarah appeared at the sound of his tone, stepping into the corridor with her commander instincts already firing. Your Majesty. Call in a tracking team, Cashin ordered. Our best scouts and anyone with intelligence on human trafficking routes in the Western Territory, we leave within an hour. Consider it done. Sarah vanished with sharp, purposeful steps. Dominic arrived next, tension replacing his usual easy smile. If humans are using silver weapons and targeting werewolves, he said grimly, we're looking at organized hunters. There have been rumors near the border, but nothing confirmed. Then we confirm it today. Cashin rose to his feet and helped Finn stand. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man built like a weapon. You'll lead us to where you lost them. Can you manage that? Finn straightened, wiping his face. Determination sparked through his fear. Yes, anything. Good, Margaret will get you food, water, and clean clothes. Be ready. Cashin's silver eyes found me next, something troubled flickering across them. Ara, I need you too. I'm coming with you, I said before he could finish, his jaw clenched. Absolutely not, this is dangerous. You just told me I'm part of the court now, I shot back. Children are being taken. I'm not sitting behind palace walls while others risk their lives. I crossed my arms, stubbornness tightening every muscle in my body. And if these are human traffickers, someone who understands human towns and customs might help. Dominic hesitated, then nodded once. She has a point. If we have to question villagers or enter human territory, Ara's presence could prevent misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Cashin muttered. You mean stopping werewolf soldiers from looking like they're invading a human town? Exactly, Dominic said. Cashin dragged a hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him. Finally, his gaze pinned me again, sharp and searching. If you come, he said tightly, you follow every order, no risks, no reckless decisions, understood? Understood, I said. We both knew I was lying. He knew it too, the narrowing of his eyes said as much, but he didn't argue anymore. 1 hour, East Stables, wear clothes you can run in. The palace burst into motion around us, servants rushing for supplies, guards carrying weapons, trackers gathering maps. I returned to my quarters with Margaret close behind. This is either very brave or very foolish, she said as she helped me change into riding gear borrowed from Sarah's wardrobe. Someone told me those two things often look the same, I murmured, thinking of Cashin's warning from the night we met. Margaret's expression softened. He cares for you more than is probably safe for either of you. We barely know one another, I said quietly. Werewolves don't love like humans, she replied. When they feel the bond, it isn't slow, it's instant, total. She fastened the last button of my jacket. Be careful, Ara, not just out there, be careful with his heart and yours. An hour later, I stood in the courtyard as our group gathered. Cashin, Sarah, Dominic, Finn, 6 elite guards, and me, the lone human who had no real place in a werewolf rescue mission but refused to be left behind. We rode through the palace gates and toward the dark line of forest waiting beyond them, and with every hoofbeat, I felt the weight of the choice I'd made settle deeper into my chest. 3 weeks ago, I'd been nothing more than a girl waiting to be sold to erase someone else's debts. Now I was riding into the western wilderness beside the Alpha King, chasing after a stolen child and fighting to prove I could be more than the world had decided I was. My mother's locket thumped softly against my chest with every stride of my horse. Her last lesson echoed with it: compassion is rebellion, kindness is strength, choice is freedom. The forest closed around us like a great swallowing mouth, and somewhere ahead a 14-year-old girl waited for someone to find her. The western woods were nothing like the carefully maintained forests surrounding Silverest Palace. Here the trees grew thick and wild, their branches twisted together overhead until the daylight dimmed into a strange half-gloom. Damp earth and the metallic bite of fear clung to the air, an unspoken warning of violence that had passed through recently. Finn guided us along narrow animal paths. His movements shifted from anxious human hesitation to sharp, instinctive awareness as he followed whatever scent traces remained. Every few minutes he paused, nose lifting, shoulders tense, and then he'd change direction by a few paces, adjusting to smells only a werewolf could recognize. The trail is fading, he muttered after 2 hours, frustration tightening his jaw. The rain washed most of it away. He pointed toward a cluster of rocks near a dry stream bed. This is where I lost them. We dismounted at once. Sarah's guards fanned out, sweeping the area with practiced precision. I watched them move, quiet, efficient, every one of them knowing exactly what to look for, and beside them I felt painfully human, painfully useless. Here, one of the scouts called out. We hurried over. He knelt beside a ridged rock, pointing at faint streaks along the ground. Silver residue, he reported, and human boot prints, multiple sets. Cashin dropped to a crouch beside him, his expression dark as storm clouds. How many? At least 6, the guard said, maybe more. They knew exactly what they were doing, using silver dust to block scent trails, choosing ground that wouldn't hold prints. He looked up at his king. This wasn't random, this is organized. Thornwick is 2 miles east, Dominic said, already unrolling a map from his saddlebag. Small village. Maybe 300 people, mostly farmers. If traffickers are moving through the area, someone there has seen something, he added. Or someone there is helping them, Sarah said coldly. Werewolf trafficking always requires human cooperation. The idea hit me like a blow, humans selling werewolves, especially children, into gods know what horrors. I'd known humans could be cruel, but this, my stomach twisted. I'll go, I said suddenly. To the village, alone. Every head turned. Absolutely not, Cashin said, voice like steel. Think about it, I pressed, even as fear curled under my ribs. If you ride into town with soldiers, everyone will shut their doors and pretend nothing's wrong. But a lost human woman asking for directions, that's harmless. I can listen, ask questions, maybe see things they wouldn't show wolves. Or you could get yourself killed, Sarah snapped, or worse. She's right, Dominic said reluctantly. About the strategy, he clarified, not the going alone part. Finn stepped forward, eyes burning with desperation. If it might help Alina, please. Cashin's jaw worked as he tried to hold on to his argument, but Finn's voice, thin, breaking, hit something in him. Fine, Cashin said at last. But you're not going alone. Dominic and one guard will go with you in human form. You'll pose as travelers, ask casual questions, nothing more. His gaze hardened, and you leave before nightfall, no heroics. No heroics, I repeated, and for once I meant it. An hour later, Dominic Cale, a guard who could pass as human, and I approached Thornwick on foot. We'd hidden our horses among the trees and traded our riding clothes for simple traveler outfits worn enough to blend in. The village was smaller than I imagined. A tight circle of weather-beaten cottages surrounded an open square with a stone well at its center. Smoke curled from chimneys and the warm scent of fresh bread drifted through the chilly afternoon air. It looked ordinary, peaceful, which meant nothing. Darkness rarely announces itself. We walked toward the only inn in sight, a 2-story building marked by a faded sign, the Woodsman's Rest. Inside, the common room was dim. A few men sat in the corner nursing tankards, their eyes flicking toward us with quiet curiosity. Behind the bar stood a broad-shouldered woman dusted with flour. She eyed us with blunt suspicion. Help you. We're hoping for a meal and some directions, Dominic said easily. His whole demeanor changed, danger tucked away, charm slipping into place like a mask. We meant to head toward Millbrook but seemed to have wandered off. Millbrook's north, the woman replied curtly. You're far from it. Dominic chuckled. That sounds about right. Happens to us more than it should. We'd appreciate food and maybe a place to rest before we continue. Can you spare a table? Money exchanged hands, her suspicion eased. Sit anywhere, she said. Stew's hot, bread's fresh, I'll bring it out. We chose a table near the window with a clear view of the street, and as I sat there in that quiet little inn, every instinct whispered that peaceful places often hid the darkest secrets, if you knew how to look for them. The men in the corner went silent the moment we walked in. Their conversation stopped mid-word, and though they pretended not to notice us, their eyes tracked every move we made. They're nervous, Cale murmured, voice low enough that no human across the room could hear, heart rate spiking. Sweating more than they should, something has this place on edge. The innkeeper returned with steaming bowls of stew and thick bread. As she set them down, I decided to push gently. Has it been quiet around here lately? I asked, keeping my tone light. We heard there's been trouble in the Western Territories, bandits or something. Her hand froze for half a second. Who told you that? We passed through a village yesterday, I said casually. People seemed worried, said travelers should be careful. She sniffed. People worry about nothing. We don't have trouble here, we keep to ourselves. Mind our own business, that's how we stay safe. The way she stressed stay safe felt like a warning or a threat. Before I could say more, the inn door flew open and a young girl burst inside, cheeks flushed with panic. Mama, they're saying someone else asking questions about. She saw us and snapped her mouth shut. The innkeeper's face hardened. Emma, back room now, but I already understood. The look in the girl's eyes was unmistakable, the same desperate fear I'd seen in Finn. It's all right, I said softly. We're not here to cause trouble, but if something's wrong, if people are in danger, there's nothing wrong here, the innkeeper snapped, cutting me off. Emma, go. Emma ran, tears streaking her face. The men in the corner rose to their feet, shoulders squared, their aggressive intent clear. One of them, a thick-built man with a ragged scar across his cheek, strode toward us. Maybe you folks should move along, he said, stopping at our table. Like my cousin said, we keep to ourselves, don't need outsiders poking around. Dominic's face stayed cheerful and harmless, but I felt the tension ready to explode beneath his calm surface. We're just having a meal, friend, he said pleasantly. No trouble meant. Scarface jerked his head toward the door. Road to Millbrook S that way, best start walking while there's still daylight. We were being shoved out, proof enough we had stumbled too close to something the whole village was trying to hide. I stood slowly, my gaze locking with the innkeeper's. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're afraid of, it won't end well, not for this place, not for anyone involved. Her expression iced over. Get out and don't come back. We stepped into the street, but I made sure to memorize everything, faces, buildings, the fear in Emma's eyes. Even the way she had glanced toward the far edge of the village, as if afraid of something out past the last row of houses. Once we were clear of sight, Cale spoke fast. There's a barn on the eastern ridge, too large for a village this small. And I caught a scent near it, a young werewolf, female, fresh. My breath caught. Elena, she's here. We returned to Cashin and the others and shared everything we'd learned. Finn nearly snapped in half with fury, his amber eyes blazing with a grief so sharp it hurt to look at him. We go in after dark, Cashin said, tone absolute. Small team, silent extraction. Sarah, take your stealth unit. Dominic, Cale, you're with me. He turned to Finn, voice softening. You stay with the horses. She'll be terrified when we bring her out. She needs to see someone she knows right away. Can you do that? Finn's jaw trembled, but he nodded. Yes. I'm coming too, I said before anyone had the chance to disagree. Cashin opened his mouth, ready for a fight, then stopped. Something shifted in his expression. You stay behind me at all times, he said. You don't fight unless you have no choice, and if I tell you to run, you run, understood? Understood. This time I meant it. When darkness settled across the forest, we moved like shadows slipping between the trees. Sarah had chosen 3 guards who moved with unnatural silence, almost ghost-like. Even walking among them, I barely heard their footsteps. The barn Cale had mentioned stood alone at the edge of the village, separated from the nearest house by a long stretch of overgrown grass. In the moonlight, it looked harmless, but as we got closer, the truth revealed itself. A heavy iron lock on the door. Windows boarded from inside, and the building angled perfectly for villagers to watch it from multiple vantage points. This wasn't a barn, it was a cage. Sarah signaled her team. They melted into the shadows around the perimeter. Cashin and I approached the door while Dominic knelt beside the lock, pulling small specialized tools from his jacket, tools meant for exactly this kind of work. A soft click. The lock released without a whisper. Cashin pushed the door open just enough for us to slip inside. The smell hit me immediately, straw, sweat, fear, and the stale scent of bodies kept in captivity. And underneath it all, the faint, lingering scent of tears. As my eyes adjusted to the thick darkness inside the barn, shapes slowly formed out of the shadows, cages, 4 of them. And inside each one, bodies huddled together, trembling and silent. Alina wasn't alone. A small, shaking voice rose from the nearest cage. "Who are you? If you're with them, I'll fight. I don't care how many of you there are." "Alina Aldridge," Cashin said softly, his voice gentle even though I could feel the fury pulsing off him like heat. "Your brother Finn sent us. We're here to take you home." A broken sob escaped her. She tried to swallow it down. "Finn's alive. They told me he was dead. They said I was alone." "He's alive," I said, leaning close so she could see the truth in my face. "And he's waiting for you." Dominic was already at the cage lock, working fast but steady. "Everyone stay calm," he murmured. "We're getting you out." One by one, the cages opened. I counted 7 captives, 5 young werewolves, 1 Alina's age and another barely older than 20, plus 2 human children who stared at us with terrified, hopeful eyes. "The humans too," I said firmly when I saw a guard hesitate. "The humans aren't our responsibility," he began. "They are now," Cashin cut in, voice sharp as a blade. "Everyone leaves with us." Sarah was already calculating. "We can take all of them if we double up on horses, but we need to move. Their captors will return eventually." We had just begun escorting the captives toward the barn doors when sudden torchlight washed over us, bright, harsh, blinding. Well, a familiar voice drawled. Scarface from the inn stood in the doorway with at least 10 armed men behind him. "Told you we should have killed the nosy travelers earlier." Sarah's guards surged forward, forming a wall between the prisoners and the armed villagers. But we were boxed in, outnumbered, and too close to the captives to fight freely. "You're making a fatal mistake," Cashin said, stepping forward. His voice dropped into that cold, commanding register that sent a chill through every living thing in the barn. "I am Cashin Wolf, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. You are holding my people captive. Stand down and you might survive what comes next." Scarface barked out a harsh, ugly laugh. "The Alpha King here in our little village. The king doesn't dirty his hands with." He didn't finish the sentence. Cashin moved so fast my eyes barely tracked him. One heartbeat he stood beside me, and the next he had Scarface pinned against the barn wall, hand clamped around the man's throat, silver eyes blazing with inhuman light. "I don't make empty threats," Cashin growled, his voice layered with something deep, ancient, and deadly. "You have 5 seconds to order your men to drop their weapons, or I show you exactly why my people call me king." "Drop your," Scarface wheezed, struggling for breath. "Drop your weapons." "All of you," the men hesitated, then slowly lowered their weapons, fear finally sinking in. "Sarah, secure them," Cashin ordered, releasing Scarface. The man collapsed at his feet, gasping. "Dominic, send word to the nearest garrison. Every person involved in this operation is to be identified and arrested. Search every building if you have to." One of the captured men muttered, "What about us? We were just following orders, trying to make money selling children." Cashin's fury was almost a physical force. "You'll stand before the joint human werewolf council I'm forming, and you will face justice. I guarantee it." While Sarah's guards restrained the traffickers, I guided Alina outside. She was shaking from exhaustion, filthy and thin but alive, and then I saw Finn sprinting toward us. The moment Alina recognized him, she tore away from me and ran into his arms. Their reunion was a tangle of cries and laughter, both of them clinging like they'd found air after drowning. The human children's siblings, taken from a farm several villages away, stood frozen, wide-eyed with fear, watching the werewolves as if expecting fangs and claws at any moment. I knelt beside them. "You're safe now," I promised softly. "We're taking you home. No one here will hurt you." "They're monsters," the older child whispered, eyes darting toward Cashin. "No," I said firmly. "They're not. The monsters were the ones who locked you in those cages." I pointed toward Cashin, Sarah, the guards gently helping the captives mount horses. "These people saved you, remember that?" The ride back to Silverest lasted most of the night. We traveled slowly to spare the children and the weakened prisoners. Alina rode with Finn, whispering to him while he held her like he was terrified she might vanish again. The other rescued youths were placed with guards, and I found myself sharing a horse with the younger human child, a little girl who eventually fell asleep against my back, trusting me completely. By the time dawn broke over the palace walls, painting the dark stone rose gold, Cashin rode up beside me. His clothes were torn and dirt-stained, and exhaustion clung to him, but there was a quiet, fierce satisfaction in his eyes. "You did well tonight," he said. "I barely did anything," I argued. "You're the one who terrified those men into surrender." He shook his head. "You recognized fear in that girl's eyes, you insisted on saving the human children, and you comforted them when they recoiled from us." He looked at me steadily. "You did far more than you think." He paused for a moment, his silver eyes settling on mine as if weighing something heavy inside him. "That's the kind of bridge we need," he said quietly. not just treaties between leaders, but kindness between people. You saw children who needed help and you didn't stop to think whether they were human or werewolf. That's rare. It shouldn't be, I murmured. No, he agreed softly. It shouldn't, and that's why I need you here, why this court needs you. Why-eyed, he abruptly cut himself off and looked away. Why you what? I asked, my heart doing that strange flutter I still didn't know how to name. I'm grateful you grabbed me in that garden, he finished. But I could feel it, that wasn't the ending he'd meant. The next few weeks changed everything. Thornwick's trafficking network fell apart piece by piece. 23 people were arrested. Even Damien Ashford was dragged in after his financial records exposed the truth. He'd been funding the entire operation. And my father's so-called debts, they weren't tied to gambling at all. They'd been forged to trap desperate families and force them to hand over loved ones. When I learned that, I felt sick to my core. I'd almost married a man who treated human lives like merchandise. The council Cashin had spoken about, a joint human-werewolf alliance, finally became real. Representatives from both sides worked together to stop anything like this from ever happening again, and somehow I ended up in the center of it all, translating more than words, translating fears, histories, and wounds. It wasn't simple. Arguments broke out. Old prejudices clawed their way back to the surface. Some nights I wondered if everything would crumble, but slowly, painfully, progress happened. Rowan became one of my strongest supporters after I helped negotiate a trade deal that saved his family's territory. Isadora stayed stern, but every now and then I caught a flicker of approval in her eyes. Sarah taught me self-defense, insisting I should never rely on anyone else to protect me. Dominic welcomed me into strategy meetings, always wanting my read on human politics. And Cashin stayed perfectly proper, maddeningly proper. We worked side by side every day and our friendship deepened, steady, warm, constant. But the spark from our first meeting never went away. It hovered in every glance, every pause, every breath. Until the night of the autumn festival, exactly 3 months after I first arrived at Silverest. The palace looked like something out of a dream. Lanterns hung from the branches, glowing like tiny moons. Long tables overflowed with dishes from both our worlds. Music drifted through the courtyard, and for the first time I saw humans and werewolves mingling without fear, slowly trying to trust one another. I stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching Alina dance with her brother. She'd healed more than I ever thought possible. The children we'd rescued had been reunited with their families who came all the way to the palace just to thank us. You look deep in thought, Cashin's voice came from behind me. He'd been busy all evening, surrounded by diplomats, but now he stood close enough that I could feel his warmth even through the cool night air. I'm just thinking about how different life is now, I said. 3 months ago, I thought everything was over. And now I'm standing here watching humans and werewolves celebrate together, and I helped make this happen. You didn't just help, he said, stepping beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. You made it possible. Before you came, I'd lost hope in true cooperation between our species. I thought the divide was permanent. You proved me wrong. I had good teachers, I said softly. The lantern light reflected in his eyes, turning them into shimmering silver, and a king brave enough to gamble on a terrified girl hiding in a garden. That terrified girl changed everything, he said. His hand slipped into mine slowly, giving me a chance to pull away. I didn't. Elra, he said, his voice lower now, almost vulnerable. I've been trying to keep boundaries. I wanted you to have space to adjust without feeling pressured. But I need you to know something. What I felt that first night, it wasn't a passing moment. It hasn't faded, it's only grown. My heartbeat hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The mate bond you mentioned, I whispered. I still don't know if that's what this is. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, he said. Mate bonds are supposed to be instant. Ours has been slower, deeper, but whatever it is, it's real, and the choice is yours, fully yours. I won't ever use my position to force your hand. You've had enough choices taken from you. I thought about everything that had carried me to this moment, my mother's quiet lessons, the desperate grab for a stranger's arm, the courage to step into a future I didn't understand, and for the first time I didn't feel afraid of what came next. I found myself thinking about Cashin, not as the feared alpha king everyone whispered about, but as the man who gave me something no one else ever had, the right to choose my own life. He was the one who listened, who stepped back when I needed space, who spent 3 long months proving through quiet actions that he saw me as a person, not a burden, not an object, not a duty. I was terrified that night in the garden, I said softly, my voice barely reaching above the music around us. I thought I was going to be sold. I thought I'd disappear and no one would even notice. I felt like I didn't matter to anyone. I lifted my eyes to his. But you gave me the chance to become someone new. You treated me with respect. You gave me a place where I felt safe, where my voice mattered. How could I not love you for that? He inhaled sharply quick, almost startled, before pulling me into him, his forehead gently pressing against mine. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you," I repeated, the words steady and certain now. "I don't know if this is a mate bond or something else entirely, but it's real, you're real. And this life, this path we're building," I placed my hand over his heart. "I choose it, I choose you." His lips found mine in a soft, hesitant kiss at first, as if he still wasn't convinced I wouldn't vanish. But when I wrapped my arms around his neck and pulled him closer, everything changed. His hold deepened, sure and steady, filled with all the emotion he'd been holding back for months. The festival carried on around us, laughter, music, and lantern lights swirling through the air, yet we moved as if the world had slipped out of focus. Just the alpha king and the desperate girl who once clung to him like he was the only safe thing in the world. When we finally parted, breathless and warm, Cashin smiled, an unguarded, brilliant expression that transformed him completely. "You realize what this means," he murmured. "Werewolves mate for life, you're stuck with me." "Good," I said, touching the silver locket resting against my throat, my mother's last gift, the thing that kept me steady through every storm, "because I'm not leaving." Across the courtyard, I spotted Sarah handing Dominic a handful of coins, both looking far too pleased with themselves. Finn and Alina were waving wildly, grinning like children who already knew the ending of the story. Even Isadora gave a short, approving nod, which was practically a full declaration of joy coming from her. The future stretched wide before us, full of dangers, new battles, uncertain politics, and people who still clung to old hatred. The bridge between humans and werewolves would be tested again and again. Some days it might feel too fragile to stand on, but we'd face it all together. A king who learned that strength wasn't only teeth and power, but patience and gentleness too, and a woman who discovered that compassion, even in the darkest moments, could shift the world on its axis. My mother had always told me that compassion was its own kind of rebellion. That kindness was a blade sharper than fear, and she was right, because grabbing a stranger's arm in a moment of panic didn't just save my life, it led me to belonging, purpose, and a love strong enough to change not just us, but everything around us.